Hi, I'm Jallomoth, the curator of all things curious, and I'm just sitting here moping about Star Wars in 2024. I know, pathetic. But it's kind of my job to be a yapper, so here we go. For the last, 50 years, there's been a shimmering light in the eyes of children everywhere. A light known as Star Wars. But as of late, that once bright star has gone dim, faded away to an almost unnoticeable speck of what it once was. I have not respected anything this franchise has produced in over 30 years. Except for a little bit of The Mandalorian, but that quickly got churned into slop too. And I don't really fault myself for that opinion. Plenty of people like me saw Star Wars' many flaws and just outgrew it, and a weird part of me still feels oddly guilty. But truthfully, seldom things have fallen off harder than George Lucas's Star Wars, and I won't get too deep into that today, although it probably will seep in through the tone of this video, clearly. Actually, you know what? I changed my mind. We can talk about it a little bit. Plenty of things from my adolescence are still enjoyable to this day. Even though Spider-Man has been shoved through the MCU meat grinder, I still really like him and respect his story and morals and where he came from, and I still enjoy the idea of Spider-Man. But Star Wars just seems different. The sometimes noxious fanbase and the even worse content they cling to makes me want to disassociate with the entire franchise altogether. It makes me want to disavow ever liking any of it, and that child inside my heart drops his Ultimate Star Wars sticker book and falls to his knees, dying a little bit. The only thing that's escaped from this black hole of cringe-inducing fandom in my eyes are the original 3 movies, and maybe not even this 3rd one in all honesty. Oh, and this game, and some of the books from the 80s. And like I said, like a third of the episodes of The Mandalorian are pretty good too. Some people still enjoy the sister content, but I'm not gonna watch a spin-off of a garbage film, no matter how good it is. I'm sorry. If the prequels aren't any good unless you watch the Clone Wars, then maybe neither should exist. But what is this, the dark side of Star Wars? I will admit, I can be pretty cynical and hard-headed when it comes to grudges against media. So what exactly are we doing here then, if I thought I'd never come back? Well, I thought long and hard about my apathy for Star Wars, and I thought if I should give anyone the benefit of the doubt, it should be myself. So I decided to indulge my younger self and sat down to find out what it was exactly that had captivated and enchanted me so much. And what I ended up finding so powerful about A New Hope is the simple, elegant, and almost magic art of the character introduction. For instance, our film begins with C-3PO and R2-D2. Opening on these two is a flawless decision. Firstly, back in 1977, the idea of opening your movie on 2 droids was just as captivating as it was unique. The fact that 3PO and R2 are our first glimpse into this retro-futuristic world makes a lot of sense. They are the vehicles for the grand opening of this story, smuggling the Death Star plans off of the Tantive 4. The reason this is so fitting is because these two are plot machines. I mean, they're quite literally a story vehicle and a walking plot device. And honestly, they might be some of the best written devices I can think of. R2 has more personality than anyone from the prequels or sequels and doesn't say a single word. These two funky little bastards find themselves in the midst of a Star War, if you will, which before turning into a political nightmare, and whatever the hell you want to call this, is what this series was all about. This dark yet hopeful sort of Western approach to the idea of war, set on the stunning frontier of fantasy space, which is masterfully conveyed in our next introduction, the confrontation between the rebels and the stormtroopers. Do you even need me to elaborate on this? This is like textbook, simplistic, effective cinema. You can immediately tell who the aggressor is here, which ones come from a regime and which ones come from a guerrilla militia. And the best part is that all of this is just a backdrop for one of the most influential entrances in movie-going history. I mean, I know it's a little early in the video to be like totally speechless, but Vader's introduction is the most timeless badassery imaginable. The Imperial March swelling, hearing his stark, labored, mechanical breathing, so much intrigue and menacing fear is built just from the first teaser this movie gives us of him. I find a shocking amount of beauty and importance in the simplicity of it all. When your villain's design looks like this, there isn't really a need for many words. And when we do hear him talk, it only affirms this oppressive, terrifying authoritarianism. He's got this slight mid-Atlantic, near-British accent, which can be found in the Emperor and nearly every high-ranking Imperial officer. Despite Lucasfilm and Disney both endorsing children to consume and interact with this IP en masse, it had some surprisingly dark and real themes. The Empire isn't just any empire, it's this empire. And this empire! The Ewoks are Viet Cong. Look it up. But anyways, Vader's true first big scene after his entrance is his disposal of Captain Antilles, who we find out later is C-3PO and R2-D2's master, which in my opinion is a detail that gets overlooked quite a bit. Every time I hear that line of dialogue, I'm like, he's their master? We're gonna do our best to ignore this actor putting his hands up, which makes him look not only not dead, but not even unconscious. I really do think this scene gets overlooked though. I mean, we just saw a man get choked to death by a terrifying robot man in the movie that they have not only child but toddler merchandise for. That's kind of cool. Remember when movies were awesome and villains were metal as fuck? It can still happen, but it's kind of rare. Seriously though, I can't get over this. Vader could have choked this guy with the Force easily, but no. He took pleasure in manhandling him. So much so that he snapped his neck before the interrogation could even begin. We instantly see that this Vader guy does not fuck around. And even though we eventually find out that Darth is kind of nothing more than a bodyguard, some hired muscle that gets bossed around by pricks in suits, his introduction is so moving in black and white that he's never not the main threat of the film. He is a perfect representation of the darkness this movie's trying to convey. And this whole movie, the whole franchise, is about that balance, the yin and yang of it, light and dark. And one of two perfect counterparts to that darkness Vader represents is his daughter, Princess Leia. Leia is hope personified. She's a strong-willed believer, and I've never seen a beacon of hope represented with this much saturation. Her entrance perfectly encapsulates that feeling of a light in the dark. Surrounded by all this death and suffering on a doomed ship in the vacuum of space is this beautiful, angelic woman. And while the look and feel of Leia's first scene is just as stunning as the others, if not more, the thing I find most moving about this is the score. Remember that balance I was talking about? Well, this entrance manages to transition the soundtrack from that harsh staccato sound of the Imperial March to Leia's theme, which I can only really describe as radiantly beautiful and inspiring. Many people on YouTube have said this stupid-ass sentence before me, but John Williams is always a win. But let's take a moment to look at Vader's other foil, the most famous bisexual icon in human history. Okay, now, Luke sorta just walks into frame, so you might think my whole narrative kind of falls apart, but it doesn't. I almost thought that it did, but I realized something. Luke is the everyman. He's a little blander than the average character, but he's a good guy. He's you, and literally me. Somebody who wants to see the world and stand up for the little guy and leave his humble life to seek adventure. Because he's cherry-picked right from the middle of buttfuck nowhere and hasn't experienced the rest of the galaxy, we relate to him as an audience because we don't know what this world is like either. He's the audience surrogate. He's our stand-in. The kid doesn't need this crazy intro full of character intrigue that makes you ponder about what his past is like. We already know Luke's past. He's been stuck in the middle of nowhere trying to siphon liquid out of the sand with the living versions of cardboard and Wonder Bread for like 20 years. You could very easily call all of these introductions mid, but I just find them so beautiful. Is George Lucas a goddamn genius for saying, "Okay, Mark, now walk into frame on the left side of the..." No. George Lucas isn't a genius at all. This movie is a miracle, and it's thanks to the hundreds of talented actors and artists who brought this strange world to life. But I will give George this. These days, it seems like every director either doesn't write a story at all or shoots themselves in the foot by making it way too complicated. I just think it's okay sometimes for movies to have simplistic, well-done elements. Sometimes it feels like a director is trying to reinvent the burger, you know? They got that burnt-ass cheese crisp on it and like some nasty-ass pickled onions, and it squirts cheese like a pimple, and like, you're gagging. This was $40.
$40? $40.
There's gold leaf. It didn't even come with fries. They're trying to trick you into eating the nasty patty with the idea of a burger. And then George Lucas waddles over to you and hands you this. Oh my god. George. Can we talk about the wizard guy now? I've been dying to talk about the wizard guy. Oh my gosh. So I really thought I was going to come out of this video without having to talk about the special edition changes, or SAC, as I will continue to say, just like that. So for those who don't know, George Lucas is a media revisionist, which is a buzzword I just made up. What I mean by that is that he does not believe that media is sacred. He thinks it is his God-given right to go back and change this movie every 5 to 10 years with needless CGI slapstick and just like the most asinine, left field, fucking nothing changes you could possibly add to a movie. I'm sure you could probably watch like 10 Mr. Plinkett or Shea Frillis videos on this right now. But the reason it's relevant to me is because it entirely changes Obi-Wan Kenobi's entrance. Obi-Wan is special to me because, really, he's the first mystery of Star Wars, which is a trilogy rife with questions begging to be answered, even if this one does only last like 10 minutes. Despite Luke's intrigue about the name Obi-Wan Kenobi and knowing a crazy old hermit on a hill named Ben Kenobi, he decides to listen to his aunt and uncle and stay home to do his chores instead of giving in and investigating this message he found on his robot. But R2, being the sweet little story device he is, decides to wander off to kick things into motion, because he already knows how this movie ends and Luke needs to get the hell out of there. So now, instead of Luke getting to meet the creepy old man who makes wizard beer in the mountains, he goes out to find R2 and gets jumped by Tusken Raiders, who are secretly the coolest thing in this entire franchise. Scared for his life, Luke calls out for help and his prayers are answered by the exact old man he went out looking for. But he isn't saved through violence or even talking. He just bellows this horrific noise through the valley and it scares all the raiders off. Here, have a listen. That was awesome. Who in their right mind would change anything about that noise he just made? But you know, George coming in with his sack. Let's see how he tries to top that. What? Before, it sounded like a dinosaur, and now it sounds like 5 macaques. I would love to see, in writing, what George Lucas found off about that. The idea that when given the chance to go back and re-edit his magnum opus, there was this big to-do list for the sound editors of what to change, and number 110 on the list was, "Make Obi-Wan's intimidation call 65% stupider, please." It says here in 2011 that this was changed again, so did they change it back, or... Huh. For the sake of what I'm doing right now, let's just say that the first one is canon. Alec Guinness portrays such a wonderful and whimsical character with Obi-Wan, and his whole introductory scene is great. His playful and mysterious dialogue as he slowly reveals that he's the man the message was for is just enchanting. Star Wars is a fantasy sci-fi, not a sci-fi fantasy. Jedi are like these creepy old Catholic men with superpowers. They call themselves the knights and abstain from worldly pleasures. The whole religious tone and nuanced take on the Jedi was horribly flanderized in both following trilogies, in my opinion. The prequels tried doing way too much with it to the point of insanity, and the sequels forget that it all exists to have this cool lightsaber spaceship fight scene Marvel quipping, "Kill me, now." Our next and kind of last real big introduction in A New Hope is our bounty hunter duo, and honestly the whole Mos Eisley Cantina scene is a great introduction to just the world this all takes place in. This incredibly diverse group of aliens is not only super entertaining and a technical FX marvel, but it just does a lot for the world building. We see hundreds of different walks of life, chaotically all enjoying this little shared space. Except for those dirty fucking droids.
Hey, we don't serve their kind here.
What?
So Obi-Wan starts chatting it up with the best character in fiction, Chewbacca, first mate of the Millennium Falcon, who takes them both to the captain. Much like Han Solo himself, his introduction is blunt, fast, and straight to the point. Dude literally sits down and says, "I'm Han Solo, this is my duo's partner Chewbacca, we're down to squad up, where we dropping?" I think what's different from Han about every other character here is that he's more of an exit guy than an entrance guy. Really, no entrance could hold up to that Greedo scene. Once again, George pulls out his sack and attempts the world's first ruin my movie speedrun and decides to bungle this one up too. But long story short, since you've probably heard this a million times, Han shot this motherfucker in cold blood in front of everybody because he is a bamf. Didn't even let him react, just...
Yes, I bet you have.
Then Mr. Lucas over here probably got like 3 emails being like, I thought Han Solo was a good guy. I can't be showing this to my kids. So he made the god-awful decision of adding him dodging a bullet that Greedo shoots first to make it seem like he had no other choice. This is terrible looking and more than counterproductive. The only character that got assassinated in this scene is Han Solo, and it's a national tragedy that there isn't a widely available way to even access these older versions of the movie, let alone upscaled to not look like it's from '77. Everything I'm saying has been said in 1,000 ways by 1,000 guys on this website over the past 2 decades, but there's a reason for that. I want to call the Star Wars fanbase miserable, but with 6 of the 9 movies being borderline unwatchable to me, and the first 3 getting more and more tampered with as the years go by, how could you not be? Although I don't mean to overly generalize. Even in the worst fandoms, there will always be talented and dedicated fans. I could prattle off some phenomenal Star Wars content for quite a while actually, like all the stuff by Mighty Jabba's Collection, or Boy Like Hobby Time, Shea Frillis, RLM, Jontron, Summoning Salt, Rich Boy J, Cinema Sticks, Analyzing Evil, Nostalgic 9080, Wii Super. I like hearing nerds talk about Star Wars, I can't lie, it's a big guilty pleasure. It reminds me of that little kid, who may or may not have been a moth, who could not stop caring about every pointless little detail in this series. It was definitely one of my first big, real hyperfixations. This world and these characters and their legendary introductions onto our screens and into our hearts is what captured me and every other poor unfortunate soul who loved this series too. And no matter whether the downfall is all they talk about, if they slyly mention it through rose-tinted glasses, if they kind of steer clear of that whole discourse for one reason or another entirely, or they reminisce on it through a sort of nostalgic yet disappointed tone, it's obvious to see why people still care. Why makers keep making and collectors keep collecting, and why whatever they are still share their feelings about this series for good or bad, just like me. And that's kind of special. I think in the near future we could be seeing a lot more of these mini video essays looking back on the other series that started strong and were diluted and mutilated into shit, the biggest culprit of the last 20 years by far being Marvel Studios. You gotta admit, they did have a pretty solid run. The ratio of wins to losses was way better than Star Wars, but for falling off, that may make it even harder to disassociate with the series. Like those poor bastards who are still actually trying to keep up with whatever nonsense is still being spat out of Disney Plus right now. Like right now, today. 2 new Marvel shows and 3 Star Wars IPs have been released since I started talking. It's a nightmare. It makes you long for a time when movie sequels could come out like this. Now, to be honest, Empire and Return of the Jedi's character introductions aren't as well defined as A New Hope's, and while I'd love to say, if this video does well, I'll do the bright side of Empire Strikes Back, I won't. Because, first of all, I'm pretty sure this video isn't going to be doing insane numbers or anything. I'm doing this video because looking for the bright side of something is my way of trying to find closure. And now that I've reached the bright side, I'm not angry anymore. I think I just needed a way to organize my thoughts about this. To understand where my enjoyment came from, why it faded away, and whether or not it still holds up. And for Star Wars, I think it definitely does as long as you mean its original 3-film run. Just try to forget that the rest of it exists. And are the introductions the only positive to these films? Of course not. They've got such a moving score, understated performances, a sense of scale to its world, I could go on and on and on. I just wanted to chat about something that I don't hear praised very much. You know, so that the video doesn't feel so samey to the people who have seen every Star Wars video there is. And whether that's you or not, maybe you should try taking a chance on some of my other videos. I've got quite the range of topics going on here for you to choose from, and it's only going to grow by the week. What bad series should I defend / shit on next? The MCU? FNAF? Steven Universe? Homestuck? What's your guilty pleasure? What's that one hill that you'll die on? Oh, I'm not talking about Sonic though. Ever. Let's rip that band-aid off now. But if you want to beg me for that, the best place to do it would be Jallomoth.com. I repeat, Jallomoth.com. Or any of the other various social links in the description, being my Twitter or the Jallo Plaza. As always, big thanks to my patrons like Gambit, Hoops McCann, and Joe Wheelcar. If we can get just a few more members on there, I think I can afford my oxygen bill this month, so please consider subscribing. Like, here on YouTube too. Okay, that's enough e-begging. Move along, have a good night, and stay curious.